I can never forget that terrifying night in 2003. Fresh out of college and full of dreams for the future, I had just started working as a programmer at an IT company in the city center. Determined to prove myself, I often stayed late at the office. That night was no exception. I was so absorbed in coding that I lost track of time. My eyes grew heavy, and when I finally glanced at my watch, I froze. It was nearly 2 a.m. Hastily, I packed up and headed downstairs. The office district was eerily quiet at that hour, the dim street lights casting long shadows that only emphasized my solitude. Back then, ride-hailing apps did not exist yet. If you needed a taxi, you had to wait by the roadside and hope one came by. The chilly autumn wind bit through my thin jacket, making me shiver. I regretted not bringing something warmer. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional distant bark of a dog breaking the silence. After waiting for nearly 20 minutes, my feet were numb from the cold. Just as I was about to turn back, defeated by the biting cold, a pair of headlights pierced through the foggy darkness. A taxi, moving almost unnaturally slow, emerged like a specter from the shadows and came to a halt in front of me. Its headlights cut through the darkness like a beacon. It was an old white Santana, its paint peeling and the word "licensed" faintly visible on the yellowed sticker on the window. Such cars were common back then, so I didn't think much of it. I opened the door and got in, immediately hit by a faint, musty smell. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the driver. He wore a face mask and a dark baseball cap, leaving only his murky eyes visible. His gaze was fixed lifelessly on the road ahead. I gave him my address, and without a word, he nodded lightly and started driving. The car moved forward with a creaking sound, the tires groaning against the asphalt. It wasn't long before I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. I lived in a new development in the east, but the taxi was going west. "Driver, you're going the wrong way. You should be heading east," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But he remained silent, and instead stepped on the gas, speeding up. The car zipped through dimly lit streets, the familiar landmarks replaced by decrepit old buildings. The modern skyscrapers faded into the distance, and the few remaining streetlights flickered with an unsettling bluish glow. My heart began to race, a foreboding sense of dread washing over me. The taxi turned into a narrow alley, the surrounding buildings towering so high they almost blocked out the sky. Along the roadside were rows of abandoned taxis, their rusted frames resembling metallic coffins glinting under the moonlight. A foul stench, reminiscent of stagnant water, filled the air, bringing back memories of an abandoned parking lot I used to pass as a child. I swallowed hard, my palms slick with cold sweat. I glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at the driver. That's when I noticed something horrifying. A few strands of stark white hair poking out from under his cap, as if untouched by sunlight for years. Even more disturbing was the deep scar on his neck, as though it had been slashed by something sharp. Rubbing my eyes, I tried to dismiss the image as a trick of the light. But when I looked again, the driver's face in the mirror was featureless, replaced by a writhing shadow. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone to call the police or a family member, but there was no signal. Trapped in an unfamiliar place, all I could do was watch helplessly as the taxi plunged deeper into the darkness. The temperature inside the car dropped sharply, and I could see my breath turning to mist in the frigid air. Frost crept across the cracked windows, and a faint rustling sound came from beside me. Turning my head, I froze. At some point, 3 hunched figures had appeared in the car. They were draped in tattered clothing, their heads bowed so low their faces were hidden. My heart nearly stopped, and it felt as though my blood had turned to ice. I stared at them, unblinking. They didn't move, rigid, like 3 lifeless corpses. Then suddenly one of them slowly raised its head. What I saw made my stomach churn. A face long decayed, flesh rotted away, with hollow eye sockets that stared straight into my soul. My terror reached its peak. Trembling, I desperately yanked at the car door, but it wouldn't budge, as if welded shut. From the back seat, the corpses began to emit low, guttural moans, and the stench of death grew unbearable. Just then, The driver turned his head mechanically. His mask fell onto the steering wheel, revealing a face that was fully decayed. Rotting flesh clung to exposed bone, and glowing green flames flickered in his hollow eye sockets. His mouth twisted into a grotesque grin as he rasped, "Do you know why you could still hail a taxi so late at night?" The car accelerated wildly, the speedometer needle shooting past 180 kilometers per hour. The corpses in the back seat suddenly sat upright, letting out ear-piercing screams. Their rotting hands reached for me, the smell of decay suffocating. I twisted and dodged, but there was nowhere to hide in the cramped space. The driver laughed maniacally, jerking the wheel back and forth as the car skidded dangerously along a winding mountain road. Through the frosted windows, I saw the guardrails ahead were broken, beyond them a sheer drop into a dark abyss. Overwhelmed by the fear of death, I summoned every ounce of strength, grabbing the safety hammer beside me and smashing the window. On the third strike, the glass shattered. Cold wind roared into the car, dissipating the nauseating stench. Just as the taxi barreled toward the cliff edge, I leapt out of the shattered window. My body hit the ground hard, rolling painfully across the asphalt. Behind me, the car plunged into the abyss with a deafening crash, taking the driver and his ghastly passengers with it. The next day, I woke up in the hospital, my body covered in bruises and bandages. The doctor said it was a miracle I survived the jump from a speeding car. Despite the pain, I felt immense relief to be alive. The police soon visited me with a chilling revelation. The road I had been on was infamous for a series of grisly murders in 1994. A taxi driver named Zhao had lured late-night passengers to an abandoned village where he killed them. 3 decomposed bodies were later found in a derelict parking lot, the same figures I saw in the back seat. Even more horrifying was Zhao's end. He had driven his white Santana off a cliff, but neither his body nor the car was ever recovered. Local legends claim that on some nights, a decrepit white Santana still roams the area, its interior filled with ghostly wails. Only then did I realize the taxi that night wasn't ordinary. It was Zhao's cursed car, carrying him and his vengeful victims. As I lay in the hospital bed, the events of that night replayed in my mind. The driver's rotting face, the corpses in the back seat, the bone-chilling cold. It was all real. From that day on, I never stayed late at the office alone, nor did I ever hail a random taxi at night. Now it's 2025, and old Santana taxis are a rare sight. Yet every time I hear the faint honk of a car in the dead of night, a chill runs down my spine, reminding me of that cursed ride and the horrors I narrowly escaped. But some say that in the city's older districts, a battered white Santana still prowls the streets at midnight. If you see one with a license plate starting with 4227, remember this: no matter how late it is, don't get in. Even now, the faint honk of a Santana's horn echoes through deserted alleys. The deranged driver is still out there, searching for his next passenger.